So the story, you have to tell the story now.
Which one?
The Leviathan story. The Leviathan story.
Yeah, such a long time ago. I'm not sure I remember all the details exactly.
There's a guy who was in Cheder.
There was a guy who was in Cheder, and the Rebbe was teaching the story of what does a Kodesh Baruch Hu do with his day, all day long. So he says that he spends 3 hours every single day playing with the Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
So this kid who was 6 or 7, said, "It sounds so strange. Why should Hashem want to play with the Leviathan?" So the Cheder teacher went ballistic. And you mustn't question what it says, that's what it says in the Medrash, and that's what it is. And he really gave it to this poor little kid. And this kid was so distressed, he walked out of the Cheder and walked out of Yiddishkeit and never came back. It absolutely, totally tore him into little pieces. And never got married either. And he left Meir Shachim, and when he was after the army, because he found some way of surviving as irreligious, and went to the army. And then after the army, he went to America, worked, became very rich, and he went to live in Miami. So when he was now much older, and he was in Miami, he happened to be in the Kupach Cholim, except it's not called the Kupach Cholim, it's some clinic where he went to. And he's sitting there, reading the newspaper, and two Chabad Yeshiva Bochrim come in, and they're also waiting to go and see the doctor. One's looking after the other. So they said, "Come, let's learn a Sikha." So they sat down and learned a Sikha, and this chair's going like this, and this chair's going behind, so that the people sitting in the front row are back to back with the people in the second row, like you see it in the airport a lot. Mm-hmm. So the two kids are sitting right behind him, and he's listening. And they're speaking in Yiddish, and he knows Yiddish from childhood, he speaks perfect Yiddish. And they're reading the Sikha from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe in the Sikha talks about what Hashem does with himself all the time. And says that for 3 hours a day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu plays with the Leviathan. So the Rebbe says in the Sikha, this is an amazing question. This is absolutely an amazing question. How can you say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu plays with the Leviathan 3 hours every single day, which has got nothing to do or whatever? It's a weird question. It doesn't make sense. And the guy says, "Hey, that was my question some 60 odd years ago, right?" So the Rebbe starts to give a deep and involved Hasidic explanation. But the bottom line of the explanation was that Kodesh Baruch Hu has Rachmanis. There were 2 of them, and he killed one. So one is lonely. So 3 hours a day, he gives the one that's still alive some TLC, tender loving care, to make him feel good. It says that what the Medrash wants to tell you is that Hashem has Rachmanis on every single type of creature, everywhere in the world. It may or may not be meant to be taken completely literally, and there are Hasidic explanations and deep explanations. But the bottom line is, you have to have care for everybody. So this guy was absolutely, totally, what we would call in English, transmogrified. He was transmogrified. He was, he flipped out when he heard this. So he turned out to the Bochrim and they said to them, "What are you reading and where are you from?" In Yiddish. And they told him they came from Chabad and this and that and everything else. So of course one of them says to him, "Well, did you put on tefillin today?" He says, "Put on tefillin today? I put on tefillin once on my bar mitzvah. And that was, with a fight with my parents." I said, "Do you like to put on tefillin?" So he says, "Well, the truth is I've had this question for 60 years and you've just answered it. So I figure that, you reserve a chupar, a reward." So he said, "Okay, I'll put on tefillin." And they became quite friendly with him. They discovered he was an old man living by himself, just to come and visit him and invite him to the yeshiva, and eventually, slowly but surely, he lost some of his bitter feelings towards Yiddishkeit, become from, but he had connection. He would come, daven, sit in the children, sit and eat the kiddush in the children, and so on. So the moral of the story is, wherever you go, always learn something, and preferably learn out loud. Right.
and preferably learn strange things that somebody may have once.
We had an amazing story about learning out loud absolutely yesterday. Absolutely yesterday. Baruch Hashem, we finished with Masechta Shabbos. So I asked Moshe Rabbeinu if he'd like to learn the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Shabbos from page 1 to the end. I don't know how long that will take us. I suppose about a year. I don't know. So he said, yeah. He's learned all the Shulchan Aruch, but never systematically from beginning to end. I said, okay, so let's learn it, because that's what it says in the Tanya. You're supposed to learn Hilchos Shabbos to be able to keep Shabbos. So sitting there, me and him in Ramot Gimel was learning together in English, and suddenly this Russian who's sitting next to us speaks perfect English, and suddenly this French guy who's sitting next to us speaks perfect English, and there's another guy over there, who's American, who also speaks some English, and suddenly
some English.
Right,
The French and the Russian guys, they speak perfect English.
So instead of just me and Moshe, suddenly this private chavrusa turns into a shir for half of the shul. So we were learning the seif, we're talking about all the problems of owning a business and having a goy working for you, not working for you, with a contract, without a contract, whatever. So Moshe brought up the problem of what happens if you have an atar on the internet and it's selling. So you're keeping Shabbos at home, but lichiora, people are checking into your site and depositing money into your bank, and you don't even know about it. You're not allowed to do that. So we were discussing what are the ways out of the problem. So he says the real answer is you have to close your atar on Shabbos. Then there's somebody, your friend, Avi, right? He has an atar, and on the Shabbos the sign is closed. And then we're talking about, well, what happens if people check into it when it's still
Australia.
Shabbos? And then, so he says it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. As long as it's closed when it's your Shabbos, what other people do. Unless your atar is selling Yankel Katz's glatt kosher Hamish of food. So if it's obvious that it's a Jewish site doing Jewish things, then it has to be closed for Shabbos everywhere in the world. So there's a guy.
He's a big machmir.
Right. So then he said, but of course there's a way out the problem. Is you take a non-Jew and you give him approximately 10% of the yearly ESIC, 7%.
Which you do anyway, because the visa takes 3%.
No. It has to go to has to be a proper contract. That was the whole point.
It is a contract.
Proper contract.
Visa, when you take visa, it's a contract.
Okay, so anyway, so this guy who's sitting listening, this Russian, suddenly says, "Wow!" He says, "Now I understand what happened." So what happened? He just opened an atar on the internet in Africa, and there's 4 of them, 3 Jews and a goy.
You talking about Avram?
No, not Avram. A Russian guy. And he said that he thought that just by the fact that the goy was one of the 4 partners, that's okay. But Moshe explained that there has to be a contract whereby it says, and the goy gets the profits from Shabbos. So he says, so we didn't do that. So I couldn't understand why nobody was buying from the atar. He says, now you've told me, I'll rewrite the contract and B'ezras Hashem will start to make some money. So, just talking Torah out loud wherever you go is the best azach.
Shkoich.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So we're on the Haga, right?
Yeah.
Page 4.
Yeah, I'm on page 4. Where's the Haga?
Right side is the Haga after the first paragraph.
Okay, fine.
Ayem perek kama d'avodah zara daf gimel amud bet. See in avodah zara gimel beis revi'it, the 4th hour of the day. Yoshev u'msachek im Leviathan. God sits and plays with the Leviathan. Shneimar Leviathan ze yatzarta lesachek bo. Right? It says in Tehillim, in Barchi Nafshi, you created this Leviathan to play with. So what's the 4th hour? The fourth hour from sunrise. And from the time that you're finished, as it were, with Kriyas Shema, and hopefully with davening also. So we'll explain what it means, like you said, the more non-literal interpretations. In the 3 hours that begin in the 4th hour, Unikra samuch lemincha. It's called the hours that are near mincha. Yeah. Because the 4th, 5th, and 6th hours are just before mincha, and the 6th hour, in the middle of the 6th hour, you can start mincha, davening mincha. Kedita b'Gemara Rish Perek Kaf Pesachim, and Yitzchak tiken tfilat mincha, and Isaac was the one who fixed the hour of mincha. He was the first one to daven mincha in a fixed hour. And we know the Yitzchak Lashon tzchok u'schok, and Yitzchak literally means pleasure, joy, and having fun and playing. Just like Sarah said, Hashem has made laughter for me, meaning it's a game. And therefore, and during those hours, God also has laughter. He has joy. He plays with the Leviathan. The question still remains, why is it the Leviathan? But we see that the Leviathan is related in its very nature to this idea of a kenigya, of a gladiator game between the Leviathan and the behemoth. Now we add, Gam ki Yitzchak chafar be'erot, shu inyan ha'ala'at man. And Yitzchak also, his divine service is symbolized by his digging of wells. And that's called raising feminine waters. So how is this related to it? So for this we would have to go a little bit deeper. We'll see it a little bit later. Elsewhere, and the elsewhere is in Likutei Torah and Parshas Shlach. We've explained, says the Tzemach Tzedek, I guess, that the second parsha of Kriyas Shema, Vayayim Shama, lo nikra adayin osim retzono shel makom ki devai. It doesn't say there that we perform the divine will properly. Because it only says Vayayim Shama tishmo Hashem, and there's only b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. It doesn't say v'chol modecha. It doesn't say with all your might. It's just with all your heart and with all your soul. So it means that the person is not yet completely fulfilled his potential of serving God. As opposed to the first paragraph of Shema, where it does say b'chol nafshecha. דהיינו, שלהיות ההמשכה והגילוי מסובב כל מילים וממלא כל מילים, שזהו נקרא עושים רצון של מקום, זהו דווקא על ידי בכל מאודיך בלי גבול. So to bring the sovev down into the memale, that's what it means to do the will of the Creator, the will of God. That only happens b'chol meodecha, when you have with all your might, meaning without end, without limits. וזהו הבחינה הנזכר כאן, שלהגיע להמשיך בחינת הפעם ילווה, זו על ידי העבודה הרוחנית, העבודה הרוחנית של הצדיקים נקראים נוני ימה, מה שאין כאן ולא בחינה בכל מרדכיו של מר וים שמוע תשמעו כנ"ל. So what is he saying here? He's saying that the work of the Leviathan, we said that the Leviathan is the tzaddikim who are learning, are contemplating they're contemplating godliness during the day. They don't get to God through the mitzvos. They get through their contemplation. So he says that's called Bechol Modecha. It's a big chiddush.
How does that connect up with the Leviathan?
The Leviathan is an example of being one with God. Atai leveh ishi alai. He accompanies God. And he says that in a human being, to reach the state of a Leviathan, one who accompanies God, it means going beyond the memale. The memale, we've said many times, that's our reality, the reality of change. So, again, it's a little tricky here, because we've said all the time that mitzvos are of sovev. They come from the sovev. And here he's saying that the tzaddik who follows mitzvos in order to be with God, he's like the behemoth. He's not like the Leviathan. So I would expect that the behemoth would be sovev, maybe. And that the mamala would be the Leviathan. But here he says, no, the Leviathan is going beyond. Because what are you doing? You're contemplating what's beyond. You're contemplating the infinite. So contemplating the infinite is like thinking about a circle. So David, who told you how many sides does the circle have, the inside and outside, he was at the level of the Leviathan when he said that. Because he's contemplating a circle. That's what he's thinking about. He's thinking about the infinite. It's very interesting to say that the infinite has an inside and outside. It's a very interesting thought. It needs to be thought about. For that reason, the sages say in Avodah Zarah that from the day that the temple was destroyed, there's no longer any laughter above. There's no longer any laughter below. What does that mean? The laughter is might. It's gvura. So the way you understand, the only way to understand this really is that what he's talking about is the second head of the crown. He's talking about Reisha De'ayin, it's called. The second head of the crown is, in Chassidus, it's called Ta'anug. Atik. In Kabbalah, it's called Reisha De'ayin. It means the same thing. Two different ways to say the same thing. In Chassidus, Atik is Ta'anug. He says the pleasure that Hashem has with the Leviathan is an infinite type of pleasure.
Where is this connected to the Beis Hamikdash?
Beis Hamikdash was a place where a person would come to contemplate the infinite. It was where the Sobev came into the Mamali, where the light that surrounds the infinite light came down into our reality, the changing physical reality, limited reality that we have here. So what he's saying is that contemplation is always going beyond the finite. And it's ta'anug, and it's pleasurable, and this is the main thing, it's related to gvura. That's why it's called b'chol meodecha. B'chol midah v'midah shemoded lecha, for instance. B'chol meodecha means with all your might, with all your gvura. Why is pleasure related to gvura? So it's a very big question. But again, in Kabbalah, in the crown, right? You would think that it's like pleasure is like chesed, is like loving kindness. Why would pleasure be related to gvura? So first of all, it's what the Arizal says that atik is all gvura. So the simple answer is that you're right, that it's also related to pleasure. It's also related to loving kindness. But the way it appears to us, the way that we perceive pleasure is through might. How does that work out? For instance, there's a saying from the Baal Shem Tov, which we've talked about in the past because I've tried to find the source, and the only source I could find was Voltaire. Not a great source. Not even Voltaire. It's a letter from Voltaire. It gave me the whole theory that the Baal Shem Tov had some connection to French philosophers. But in any case, the Baal Shem Tov says, Ta'anug t'midi and not ta'anug. That pleasure that has no end is not pleasure. What is he saying? He's saying if you would taste the ice cream,
when you get to a different something which you didn't have before, and probably not going to have again for a while. That's Ta'anug.
That's what gives you pleasure. So there has to be a limit. So the example I always give is if you would taste ice cream in your mouth consistently,
it wouldn't be any fun.
You'd lose interest in it. Okay. Pleasure is about the change. There's a terrible thing in German called Schadenfreude, which means taking pleasure from breaking something.
Okay.
But when you think about it, that's the logical end of this whole concept, right? That if it's the last time that you're going to get pleasure from something, enjoy it, and then you break it, that's like the greatest thing, because nobody can get it. Nobody ever is going to get it again.
But there's a story from the Baal Shem Tov of a person who came to the Baal Shem Tov who told him that his wife was driving him crazy. She was always screaming and shouting at him, and to be in his house was mamish Gehenna. So the Baal Shem Tov says, your whole problem is because you're going around all the time telling jokes. So he says that because you're telling jokes all the time, you bring upon yourself gevura. And so that gevura is reflected in how your wife relates to you.
Very interesting.
So you have to stop telling jokes, right? So in other words, so here is the connection between tzchok and gevura.
Yeah. There's also a gematria that Rav Steinsaltz used to tell me all the time. He said, gematria has to be surprising. If it's not surprising, it's not revealing something new, what's the point? So he says, here's a surprising gematria from the Baal Shem Tov. I don't know where he took this from. I've never seen it. He says, what was it? Tzchok equals nitzachon. That's why I thought of it. Laughter equals victory. Interesting thing to think about. What does it mean? I didn't ask him because it was clear that he didn't care what it meant. It was surprising. It was like a new piece of information. But if you connect it to what you just said, then natzchanut, nitzchan also means natzchanut. It's also being argumentative. In a certain sense, laughter is a sublimation of being argumentative. That if a person is very argumentative, then one of the ways to sublimate that is to make a joke out of everything. Why do you need to make a joke out of everything? Because the truth is, I would have fought you on it. But let's finish with a smile. Finish that one. Right. So there's this idea that but really what he's talking about in the end is that the contemplation requires a person to go beyond the limits. You can't contemplate something. People say think outside the box. The truth is, thought that's not outside the box is not even thought. Is that what are you doing? What are you, a computer? Like you're just going to manipulate what you have in front of you? Every type of thought, by its nature, has some element of imagination in it. Has some ability to go beyond. That's exactly what defines us as a human. Otherwise, we'd just be a calculator. So just by definition, thinking has got to be outside the box. All the more so when you're contemplating God, which is completely outside the box. It's outside all the boxes. If you can't manipulate thoughts, texts in your mind in such a way that they become interesting, then there's no contemplation of God. You have to go beyond what is seen. So for instance, in thinking about the meaning of a pasuk, that's what Chassidus does all the time. You suddenly come up with this wild interpretation. Where did that interpretation come from? He says, that is Nuniyama. That's what I mean, he says, by Leviathan. He doesn't say it here, it says in other places. That's called Shashuim Atzmim. And that's the real nature of play. The real play that a person can engage in is between him and himself. It's just that some people don't understand that. So Hashem has to do a kanigya. He has to show, look, it's like a fight. It's like a game to the death. And now everybody becomes interested. But really, in any person who contemplates deeply, there's a game going on all the time between the two sides. One side says this, the other side says that. It could be a dualistic type of synthesis and antithesis. But it can also be breaking through the barrier of what I already know. There's always a game of, when I break out, have I gone too far or not? And it's sort of like playing with a fish. How do you play with a fish? So when you go fishing, right, you catch a big leviathan, a huge 400-pound shark. I don't know. People do this. They go deep sea fishing. They don't catch sharks, but they catch all these swordfish. They're huge, like 200 kilos. These things. How do you catch one of these with a what do you call it?
Fishing rod.
A fishing rod. So first of all, the fishing rod looks like a machine. It's got gears. Have you ever seen these? Yeah. Fishing rod with gears? Like you switch gears on the thing, and it's huge and it's this thick. But the key is to get the fish tired. So you let it go, you let it run, and you reel it in, and then you let it run again, and you reel it in, and let it run again. So when you think about that, that's exactly how thought works. When you're thinking, contemplating, especially a deep secret in the Torah, you have to, on one level, let yourself fly. let the thought go wherever it wants, but then you have to reel it in. So that's again. Okay, it's all a show, basically. And that's Shashuim Atzmim. That's what he's talking about, playing with the Leviathan. That's really what he's doing. He's like fishing it. He's like trying to catch it. So when you play with it, it means but it's really a process of thought. ועוד יש לומר בזה, על פי מה שכתוב בכתבי האריזה, שעל ידי התורה מצוות ממשיכים ייחוד זון, אבל להמשיך ייחוד אבא ואמא, שהוא המשכת אור חדש מאין סוף, הוא על ידי מסירת נפש דייקה. Here's another example. In the Arizal, there's this whole concept from the Zohar that there are two types of yichud. There are two types of unification, or coupling. There's the coupling between Tiferes and Malchus, which is called yichud zun, zer and pin v'nukva. That yichud is done by mitzvahs. Okay? Whenever a person does a mitzvah, he creates a unification in the higher worlds. What do those unifications do? They bring, you could say, sustenance into the world. They provide for the world. But there's a higher type of unification. There's a higher type of coupling. It's called Yichud Ava, or Abba ve'ima. Father and mother. The father and mother Partzufim. There, how do you get there? It says you have to have Mesiras Nefesh. To do that, it's not common that happens, because Torah and mitzvahs are not enough. There has to be a measure of self-sacrifice. So what does self-sacrifice mean? It means being willing to go out of the box. Go beyond yourself. Just like B'chol Modecha. What does B'chol Modecha mean? Going beyond what I'm able to normally do. So that creates that higher unification of Abba ve'ima. And what does that do? It creates new souls in the world. We talked last week, 2 weeks ago, about new souls. That the old souls have to be eaten by the new souls. So how do you create a new soul? In Chassidus it means you have to contemplate out of the box. You have to think about Hashem, think about the Soviv, think about circles, and you come to a new understanding of what Hashem is. You come to a new understanding of a pasuk, a Chiddush in Torah. That's why the Rebbe was so encouraging. He encouraged people to write their Chidushei Torah, to write their novel Torah interpretations, and to publish them. Because he says that if you're a Talmid Chacham, everything that's new, in a certain sense, falls under the category of the Chasam Sofer, Chadash Asur Min HaTorah. How can you ever say something new? So Chazal say, Chidush Torah, שעתיד תלמיד ותיק לומר, כבר נאמר לו משה מסיני. Any new novel idea that a real dedicated student says has already been said to Moshe Rabbeinu. So we talked about the fact that Talmid Vatik, a dedicated or an old student, is equal to Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. It's equal to 1,000. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Those are the 1,000 lights that Moshe Rabbeinu received at the Har Sinai. When he received the Torah, he also received the power of contemplation, the power to, like we said, to innovate. So much so that Hashem even said to the angels, even if he innovates incorrectly, I accept what he says. And, because the angels were upset at Hashem. Well, how are you giving the Torah to men? They'll change it. They'll innovate incorrectly. They'll do this. They'll do that. You have to leave it with us. We, the angels, we're set. We're permanent. We never change. We're like the laws of physics. We're immutable. But man, he's fickle. He's going to change it. He's going to do this. He's going to. Hashem says, if it's Moshe Rabbeinu,
it's fine by me.
That's exactly what I wanted. So he received those 1,000 lights, the Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, at Sinai, but then he lost it because the Jewish people made the golden calf. So the golden calf, really what it affected was our ability to innovate. And that's when everything had to start coming directly from Moshe. He was the only one that Hashem trusts from now on. He couldn't distribute these lights. He couldn't give them to everybody. In the end, he ended up giving those lights. He did get them back. And he gave them to the Sanhedrin. So that's why the Sanhedrin have the power of innovation. Because they're the Talmid Vatik. So all this means that the Leviathan, the Tzaddik who contemplates, it's because he has Mesiras Nefesh. That's what they call it. They have Mesiras Nefesh on Torah. To have Mesiras Nefesh means not just to read what the Gemara says, but to go beyond the Gemara. So what else can I say about this? And how do I understand this? And so on. That's why we say Kriyas Shema. To give as a word, to sacrifice our soul when we say one. על ידי עבודה רוחנית שבבחינת לוויתן, דהיינו חיבור היש לעין, מבחינת משרת נפש שבחד, ועל ידי זה ממשיכים להיות ילווה אישי עליי. So again, this is all a description of how the service of a Leviathan, meaning a fish of the sea, a tzaddik who contemplates God, how it works. גם יש לומר פירוש עבודה רוחנית לנשמות שבבחינת לוויתן, על דרך מה שכתוב בשולחן ערוך. There's another thing from Halacha you can learn also, how these special souls, how they function. It says in Orach Chaim, שהתפשטות הגשמות קרוב למעלת הנבואה. This is in Shulchan Aruch, at least by the Alter Rebbe. Okay? That when a person is able to strip himself of his material body, meaning he doesn't limit himself to his physical existence, to thinking about his physical existence, that's close to being a prophet. That's close to prophecy. וכעניין הובא בפריץ חיים, שאלת זין פרק א' על האריזל, אם הייתי דורש 80 שנה. And that's what the Rizal meant when he said that one Shabbos afternoon he went to sleep for a few minutes, and Rav Chaim Vital came by and he saw that his lips were moving, and he asked him when he woke up where he was, and he said, I had learned in Gan Eden explanations of the Parsha of Balaam, as they say in English, that if I now had to explain to you, it would take me 80 years. So that's called thinking out of the box. That's going beyond. So the sages said that since the temple was destroyed, there's no more pleasure in this way. So how is this even relevant to us? Amazing. This ties into it ties into the story you said in the beginning. That it also says, "B'reviyot ma'yavid, yoshev u'melamed tinokot shel beit Rabban Torah." It says, also there in the Avodah Zarah, in the same place, that the fourth hour, since it says no longer he can't play with the Leviathan. So what does he do? Where's his joy? Where's his laughter? So he says he goes to the cheder to learn with the kids. So first of all, from this you see the kids don't need to start until 9 o'clock. School shouldn't start until 9 because otherwise Hashem's not there. He's busy doing other things. But the idea again is that they make mistakes. That's what it means that the world is sustained. Which world? When you say the world is sustained on the speech, Hevel Piyam, Shetinokot Shebet Rabban, on the vapor coming out of the mouths of these little children in Cheder. What do you mean? Which world? What I mean is that they create the Ava unification now. They're the Abba V'Ima. They create the Abba V'Ima because they have Mesiras Nefesh. Why is it Mesiras Nefesh? For a little kid to go into a classroom and to try to memorize Mishnah and to learn Chumash, instead of being with the same friends, he's with his friends right now. But they're in a class. They're in the classroom, and they want to be outside. They want to play. So for them to be inside a classroom, that's already Mesiras Nefesh. It's also Mesiras Nefesh
because they're sent there by their parents, so they don't have any choice.
They have choice, especially in our generation. It's Mesiras Nefesh, but the main thing is that they say nonsense. Okay? They say nonsense. That nonsense is beyond the box. That's exactly outside the box. That's exactly this Shashuim Atzmim, that they don't understand a word. Like Rosh Steinsaltz once told me when he was younger, he couldn't understand why everybody kept saying that Moshe is a terrible man. Because it says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha Keilat Yaakov. It says Morasha. What does it mean Morasha? I didn't know what the Mo meant, but he knew Russia. So Moshe is a Russia. Huh? He said, until he learned how to read. I guess it was 3 years old, 4 years old. But you see that all the time with kids. They hear it, but they don't know how it's written. So, and we look at it, you look at their writing. Like my son still, he's 10. The spelling problems in Hebrew are much greater than in English even. So they don't really work themselves out until until a person's 13, something like 14. They still catch my daughter once in a while with a strange spelling error, even though she reads voraciously. But once in a while, it's a simple word that she puts a hey instead of an aleph. So it's funny when you see it. But when they're 7 and they try to write a letter to their mother, Mazal Tov for this and this, and you read the letter, it's one big joke, because not a single word there is spelled correctly. So that's the schok, that's the joy, that's the game. And it's a game because slowly you reel him in. Can you let him go? The best cheder teachers, as opposed to the guy there, are the guys that let them play with their minds. Let him play. You reel him in slowly. Then you let him play again. You reel him in. You let him play again. That's also how the cheder is set up. You learn for 30 minutes. You have 15 minutes outside. You learn for 40 minutes. You have 10 minutes outside. You keep doing this for Tzov Shov, like you said. You keep... Okay. And that's how the mind, that's how you have, that whenever you approach any new topic. In the beginning you have to get some basis, but after you've got some basis, you have to let the mind wander and come back, and wander and come back. Okay, so that he says, is a replacement for, meaning that the young children who are learning in cheder and playing this game of letting their minds expand and then contracting, letting them expand and contracting and so on, and limiting them and unlimiting them, that is in place of playing with the Leviathan. So what do you mean in place? It means that there's still laughter in the world, there's still joy in the world, there's still play in the world, but that play, again, what he wants to concentrate on, what he wants to ingrain in us, the Alter Rebbe here, is that play happens in the mind. And it's called Shashuim Atzmiyim. It's called, I usually say, recreation. It's what creates the world. That's what it means. The world is dependent on them. The recreation of the world depends, every innovation, that's what we mean when we say that science couldn't move forward if there wasn't any innovation in Torah. Science, technology, all these things, I don't know how much science has moved forward. But technology, the fact that we have all this technology we have is because of the Baal Shem Tov. It's because of his innovative way of understanding Torah. And we've talked about this many times, that the technology that we have today is building on the Baal Shem Tov's Kabbalah, which is called Hashra, inspirational Kabbalah, which basically means fields. Everything today is fields. So this is a whole topic that I was going to write my dissertation on my PhD on. Fields. Yeah. Fields and William James thought, but how fields are now the most important topic in all of philosophy and all of science. See, it's a big topic, but...
So where's the PhD?
Yeah, in my head.
I asked my Shavana, if you can't ask a goy to do something for you on Shabbos, if you have a computer, if you have a robot.
No, so that's a different question. Shvitat Kelim, it's the first chapter of Masechah Shabbos.
Can you ask the robot to go and turn the lights on? He said, sure, it's not a human being.
No, you can't ask it. Shvitat Kelim, we paskin. If it's programmed, it does it by itself. There's something else. But we talked about this in the past, that that's one area of halacha. There's been a whole book written on it. That the ruling that we follow Beis Hillel, and we say that our tools do not have to stop working on Shabbos, is one area of halacha that there's never been real consensus on. And it's very ripe for being switched to Beis Shammai, first chapter of Shabbos, the very end of the first chapter. Remember, Daf Yudchet. There he talks about the Rechaim and this and that, things that happen by themselves and things that don't happen by themselves. Whether you can put things to make them to dye them, it happens by itself. You don't do it. So according to Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to before Shabbos because it's not allowed to happen on Shabbos. So we today rule like Beis Hillel, except for, like, for instance, if your machine at the end, there's a question like about what do you call it, dishwasher. Can you run the dishwasher automatically on Shabbos? What's the question? It's a tool. Seemingly it's automatic, but it makes a lot of noise. If it makes noise, that's a different thing because it's marisayin. Mm-hmm. You can't. So already there you see that if it's quiet and you don't see it. So for instance, to turn the TV on, it can't. The robot can never do that. That's why you don't put a TV on the Shabbos clock. Why? Because it has sight and sound. Those are the two things that are forbidden, even though it's just a tool. It's an amazing thing that it's either the Tolo Amaratzim, or I don't understand where they came from. The modern, so-called modern Orthodox Jews who got some psak from some modern Orthodox rabbi. He told them you can put. I don't think they got a psak like that. I think they invented it. People just invented it that they could turn their TV on with a Shabbos clock. It's completely forbidden. But all the more so if we're going to paskin eventually like Beis Shammai. And in this there's actual discussions in halacha that this is the place that's most right for Beis Shammai to be adopted over Beis Hillel. And that's what was meant, that in the future we'll paskin like Beis Shammai about these automatons. It's a big topic. I'll show you the book. It's a very interesting book.
Israel Hashem. So what's the story?